Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about what are the 7 things as a SharePoint administrator you should be aware of when managing your sites and managing your users within, supporting your users within SharePoint and SharePoint Online. We talk about a little bit of everything. We talk about external sharing and governance and URL naming conventions, how to create a site like this within a few clicks of a button, your site request process, gathering the needed information for users to request their site. So more moving towards a request service versus a self-service model. A lot to unpack here. Let's get started. Okay, so as we know, once we migrate to Microsoft 365, the role and responsibility as a SharePoint administrator changes compared to what we used to have to do when SharePoint was on-prem inside of our data centers. So the monitoring the storage, monitoring your database, the database logs, the size of your content databases, your site collections, the CPU, the RAM on the front-end web servers, are you sized right for your various environments, your constant upgrades with the CU patches and things along those lines. All of that responsibility, once you're in the cloud, gets offloaded to Microsoft. So now the question is, what is the role of a SharePoint administrator once you're in the cloud? I have 7 things that I think you should consider, you should build a process around, and you should be ready for as a SharePoint administrator in order to support your organization. And if you configure for multi-geo, then you may have several SharePoint administrators against their multiple geo or region locations across the globe. And each one of them will kind of share this responsibility for their respective slice of the tenant. So here's the 7. The first thing you want to do as a SharePoint admin in Office 365 or Microsoft 365 is to disable the site creation link. With the site creation link, if you go to the SharePoint portal or the SharePoint homepage, where it displays all the sites for your given user, the frequent sites, follow sites, we have this create site and we also have this create post. I'm not too concerned with the create post because when you click on that, they're only going to be displayed or presented with the sites that they actually have edit access to. So they can create links there anyway. But creating something net new and making themselves an owner of a new site collection is concerning in a sense that, only in a sense from a governance perspective, there may be certain attributes or naming conventions, or even, because I think it's not really the request process. It's not like everything needs to flow through IT, because I think you're going to rubber stamp it anyway. Like most of us are not in a position to say, nah, you really don't need that site. We may do a scan up for duplicates to try to minimize that. And there may be some key information you want to gather just from a accountability, governance, and lifecycle perspective. We'll talk through that a little bit. But it's more so the URL, keeping track of these site collections. Your tenant can support up to 500,000 as of February 2021. And it may be higher. I haven't checked the count for probably 60 days or so. But you have 500,000 site collections you can have in a tenant. Once you go into the admin, how do you make heads or tails? It's not necessarily which ones are modern, which ones are classic, which ones have O365 groups, which ones do not, because you're going to be able to find that out. You have that type of data. But which site collections are related to your intranet, which site collections are used for development, which site collections are for department sites, if that's a thing. So it's other business scenarios to where you really want to classify that. And the easiest way to do that is the URL, because it's not invasive. The end user still get the user-friendly name of the site with the title, and no one's really paying attention to the URL. We're not branding the URL as we used to do with on-prem, especially with managed paths not being as robust as they were with on-prem, because online you only get 2 teams and sites. So now it's just like, how do you make heads or tails with these URLs, which is what the admins really bank on to really, because, you know, if you can look at a URL, you can pretty much tell what site that is, if it's prod ready, if it's for dev, or whatever the case may be. So let's disable this, and then we'll walk through the process on how to do it. you just go to SharePoint, to the SharePoint admin. So let me go into the admin center here and then fire up the SharePoint admin center by expanding everything else. And then here in the SharePoint admin center, I'm defaulted to the modern SharePoint admin portal, right, versus the classic. And in the modern portal, you just go to settings, and then you will see these top 5. And these top 5s are going to be the same. I want to say you're going to at least see these top 5 within the classic, but classic you're going to see a lot more. Some of them will relate to the classic site collection stack, which, you know, that's another thing. I think from a theme or a strategy perspective, as a SharePoint admin and as a SharePoint architect, you should be migrating and pushing the company, the organization towards the modern SharePoint stack. So there's a lot of classic settings that are settings that only relate to classic SharePoint's site collections, and you're going to see a lot of that there. But the one that we're looking for is on the site creation, and you simply have to uncheck this guy and save it. So now when you go to the SharePoint homepage, and if I click refresh, and sometimes it takes a little bit for it to disappear, but if I click refresh, you know, over time, I won't see this option. Even if I'm a SharePoint admin or even if I'm a global tenant admin, I won't see this option to create a site, and my end users won't see this option as well. Again, I'm not too concerned with the news post because there is a security check or there's a gut check on what they're allowed to do based on previous security settings. If they were granted edit access to any site collection, I'm really, really concerned with this one. Now, once you have that disabled, the other thing that you want to take a look at is a naming convention for your URLs. As I mentioned, when you look at all your active sites here in the SharePoint admin, you have, I mean, this can grow over time. Like right now it's manageable because some of us are new to the cloud or we just migrated to the cloud, but you give it 9 months, you give it 18 months, this is going to be a cesspool. It's just going to be, because everything's flat. There's no organization. Yeah, you got some key data points. Now, we definitely came a long way than what we have for central admin, right? Because in central admin, all you just have a list of sites once you select your web app. But here, one, the whole concept of web app is not here. Our managed properties are not here for organization. So really, we're just given a flat list with very minimum metadata. Most importantly, very minimum to zero custom metadata. And that's what you need, right? You need custom metadata. So we have all these columns here, and all of these are going to be attributes that come with site collections in general. And then if I go customize, they just let me shape my view. Very, very similar to like a SharePoint list. I need custom columns to where I can create a column and then I can put my metadata on these site collections and say, this is a dev site collection, or this is a department, or this site collection belongs to my intranet, so to speak, or whatever other portals that you may have. Again, you have to tell the story and accommodate so many different scenarios with site collections that in this view, they all look the same outside of their core classifications. So to help combat that, what I really leverage is the URL naming convention. So I do a prefix against all my URLs. So here are my master sites. So we, you know, one of the 7 is the site creation process, because you disabled it, right, for the user to be self-service. Now they're in the request service mode. How do you turn that around? And how do you turn that around quickly based on the type of site that they want? And these masters really play into that. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into that. For my developers, here I do a prefix for dev, so that way all my developer sites, so the site collections that my developers are using to create SPFx solutions, so that way they can use their workbench, they can deploy it locally. Most of these site collections are going to have an instance of their own app catalog, so that way they can really vet and test out their web parts. I can easily pull those up. And you can see how quick this comes up, and I can really wrap my head around, especially the things that I want to track, right? So even if I do, I think it's DPT, and again, this is where you have to come up with a naming convention, like whether your prefix is going to be for all the site collections that make up your various hubs, right? And you can have multiple hubs, right? Right now, we probably are one hub, but if you go with the strategy where you're keeping things flat and you're minimizing how deep you go with the subsites within the single site collection, the hub plays a key point. But then you would notice with the navigation experience, you're going to need multiple hubs. And then again, so now you're going to have multiple hubs. So having that naming convention for all the site collections that make up your various hubs that represents your intranet, that's where your naming convention is going to come into play. Okay, so definitely come up with a naming convention, get with your team, agree on this is what we're naming our department sites, this is what we're going to name our and there's going to be certain scenarios you don't have control over, right? And it may not be worth it. Like when you provision a Microsoft team and you have a SharePoint site to get provision with that, you may not want to get in front of that and say, okay, now let me put this prefix into that URL because you have to rename and do all this weird stuff. So scenarios like that, you probably just want to let it ride, let it grow the way it wants to grow, the way it needs to grow. But for everything else to where you're forcing your users to come through your request process, those are the ones that you want to impact. So I think it's a toss-up. And most of us have already been running with SharePoint Online for a while. And now you have to make the decision of, okay, net new, this is where we're going to go. But do we want to retrofit? And how much do we want to retrofit the site collections that already exist, right? Luckily, there's a good story behind it. So let me search on marketing, because I have examples here to where I did not use the naming convention for all my department sites, for example. And then understand that, and be clear on the distinction, especially when you start talking department sites, because a department, like for example, marketing, they can have an internal department site, meaning that this is only for the people within marketing, only visible and access to those within the marketing department. But then you have the marketing that's org facing that says, oh, here's our marketing department, and this is where all of our branding guidelines are, all of our templates for maybe PowerPoint, your deck, your contract templates, all the latest logos and all this other stuff. So marketing may have a general site to service the organization, which may be different than their internal site, right? Because their internal site ideally will probably be teams, and then that would be, named whatever the team name, but the org facing one is probably the one that you want to get in front of. So say, for example, we have this D1 marketing, and if I visit this, and already have this site up and running, people are using the site, and here we are as SharePoint admins, we want to rename the URL. Now, of course, this is something you want to work in conjunction with your business user, but let's talk about the technical piece, because anytime you talk about renaming URLs, our biggest fear, our biggest concern is the 404 error, right? Meaning that a URL used to be live, and now because we renamed the site, everything underneath that site is now going to have a new prefix or a new stub to that URL. So let's just create this document. We want to test the URL renaming feature. And here, let's just call this test document rename or URL redirect or whatever. So our URL rename, and we just test that, and then we just share this out. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get the path of this document, because this is going to be a real world scenario. The real world scenario is that some of these may be bookmarked, some of these documents may be bookmarked, some of these sites may be bookmarked, some folders within document libraries, some maybe links to lists. Like, it is so many scenarios to where users can have URLs bookmarked. So here I'm going to just paste that in. It prompts me to download. So the force is to render in the browser. There's a little trick that we have. You just put a web equals 1 query string parameter on the end of that, hit enter, and now it's going to bring up my document in the browser. Now, what I want to do, I want to bookmark this, right? So let's just go ahead and just say this is my test doc, and let's just say I have a user who has this bookmark because this is something they do on their day-to-day. I'm going to edit this because the URL I grabbed is the one that I see in the browser, and actually I want to save this one because this is going to have the URL to this particular site. So I'm going to save it as that, test it out, and I have my document as expected. The other thing I want to do is bookmark the site. Again, this is my marketing site, and I just want to bookmark this as marketing home. That's fine. And let's just put this next to the document. Okay, so these are my two. I have a deep link to a document in the site, and I have a general bookmark to the site itself, right? So now as a SharePoint admin, I'm gonna go into the Admin Center, and I lost it. Here it is, Admin Center, and then go to this D1 Marketing, and then as you can see over here, URL, you can click on Edit, and this is going to take a while to load because it's magical. So the gate or the interface, it takes a while, but trust me, it's worth the wait. And when this loads up, it's going to give you an opportunity to rename the URL. And it will actually ask you if you want to rename the site title because it thinks you're going through a transformation. And in this scenario, we don't necessarily have to rename the site title because we still want that to hold true, but we definitely want to rename the URL. Now, you would notice that once we test this out, and okay, so here we can actually walk through it. So I want to put, so my department prefix is DEPT, and then I'm going to just put the hyphen and then marketing. I don't do, and you're probably like me, we don't put spaces in URLs. We separate readable names with hyphens or underscore or some other asterisk there. And then here I'm going to just go ahead and save it. And then here's probably, do I want to rename the site? I'm going to say no to that. And because really all I want to do is impact the URL. Okay, so this is updating and it's actually doing something. And this can take time. You know, the time here may vary depending on how deep that site is. So if you got multiple documents, you got multiple pages, the time's going to reflect on how much content is in that particular site. So here, if I click on this URL, I get my department site, no harm, no foul. This is what we expected, right? But now, if I click on my bookmark, notice what happens to the URL. I get the CID ID, and then it gets redirected to the real URL. So my old URL is still in play for my bookmarks, and let's test our document, and even our document, and that's magical. Like that's like I think Microsoft always taught it that SharePoint supported this feature, and we never seen it work, right? They said, oh yeah, you can move your pages, the URL's elastic and it'll follow it and all this other, in some scenarios it worked, but something as disruptive as renaming the URL, we see, you know, this would generate a 404, right? Not found. Now what's happening here, and as a SharePoint admin, it's really clear to understand what's going on. We all know URL rewrite, right? So the URL rewrite module in IAS, we would do this all the time because here in the organization, especially in IT, we're moving things around, we're revamping things, we come up with different strategies. So we're constantly moving things around, and we have to put in these URL rewrites to kind of accommodate our, you know, some of those bookmarks and deep links and things along those lines. And that's exactly what's happening here. So that process takes a while because what it does, it creates redirect URLs in the backend, especially for the stub, right? Or the prefix. The prefix, it renames all those. So that way, if the old URL comes along, it knows how to map it. You won't see the redirect URLs in the UI, but in PowerShell, you can see those. So when you get a chance, just do a Google search on PnP PowerShell redirect, site redirects, or maybe the SPO PowerShell commandlet for redirects, and you will see those. It's important to know that those exist. Why? Because that URL, the old URL, is still under reservation. And what does that mean? That means that if I create a site and say, oh, I need this D1 URL to be part of that because the site is D1 marketing or whatever the case may be, it's going to say that that URL is not available. You're going to scan and say, okay, who's using this? You're going to scan your SharePoint site and do a search on D1 marketing. You're not going to find it, and you're going to be scratching your head like, well, how is this being used if I don't see it? It's the redirect setting behind the scenes that's in use. That's why in PowerShell, you can actually delete them because there may be the other side of that could be someone was playing, uses D1 to kind of do a POC and test it out. We don't need to preserve it. And the new site is going to be the name, but now I have a new site, a real site that I want to use that name that you were testing with. And that's why, yeah, I can rename that old site collection to a new URL just to kind of get it out of the way. But to free this up, I'm gonna have to run a PowerShell script to free up that redirect. And it's the same scenario when you delete a site, right? If you delete a site collection, you probably still want to use that name and say, hey, I want to use this name. This is not the right site type, or whatever the scenario may be. You have to go into the recycle bin, do a hard delete for it to free up that URL that's in the background. Okay, so that's come up with a naming convention. If you decide to clean it up, and the recommendation, like that's really a scenario, it depends type scenario to figure out if you should go back and retrofit everything. But obviously net new, you definitely want to have a URL naming convention policy in place. Okay, the next one we want to do is the, let's go into policies and sharing. Now, this is one of the ones that, especially if you're dealing with information security, the security group, the cyber team, whatever the scenario may be, the team that's protecting you guys from being hacked and looking at ransomware and vulnerabilities and scans and whatever the case may be, they really are concerned with how are we sharing information with external users. This is a very deep topic, but from a SharePoint admin perspective, if you have everyone, which is the highest setting, and you will notice one thing here, when I'm setting this, my OneDrive can only go as high as where my SharePoint is set, right? So my SharePoint sets the bar as far as external do. I want everyone or new and existing guests or guest only, meaning that these are guest accounts that come through the Azure AD, right? The same way that you add a user, you can add a guest account there versus implying a guest when you share a link. Right, so you can. There's two scenarios there, and that's what this setting is. That's why this setting differs from this setting here. But yeah, this is one of those things where SharePoint sets the ceiling. OneDrive and the site collections that you create have to work under that ceiling. Right now, you definitely want to set this, and you want to make sure that if you decide to go anyone, which is probably too loose for most organizations' appetite. But there are scenarios to where you need this, right? Because sometimes you need to just share the link to an external project team, and you're not going to name everyone that link needs to be shared to. So there's a scenario to where this is in play, but best believe, understand that even for your worst case scenario, and this would be worse, right? And this would be best, that's our scale. So for your worst case scenario, this setting has to accommodate for that. And then as you create sites or site collections, then you can say for this particular site, I'm gonna dial this all the way down to where you can only share with people in the organization. One of the issues I have with this setting is that because you can't go higher than the ceiling. So if you need to set your ceiling high, set it high, and then go ahead and create your site collections. I really wish we had control over what is the default external sharing setting, right? This is where I set my ceiling, right? But maybe I want my default to be this in the event I forget, right? And it could be one of those things where you just run a PowerShell scan to say who's sharing externally. More importantly, who's out there sharing externally with anyone links or new and existing guest links, right? To where you can kind of get a handle and you're monitoring these two settings. That's something that you probably want to take a look at. And it could be audit logs or, PowerShell script or a scan, or maybe you can build it in Power Automate. I'm not certain of the capability because I haven't looked at the APIs for those different scenarios, but that's something that you definitely want to monitor. Once you have that set, even if you say share with anyone and it doesn't require login, highly, highly recommend locking this down to only a handful of domains. This will allow you to kind of, again, keep a handle on who's being shared out with, who our partners are, avoid scenarios where you're externally sharing to Yahoo, Gmail, those type of non-business related URLs. And that's the concern, right? Because the concern is, if you're sharing out to Gmail and Yahoo and personal email addresses, there's no accountability, right? Because this is a B2B share. Let's say our business is sharing with the folks there at your organization. Now, if someone leaves their organization, we just assume that their offboarding or termination process would deactivate that domain, which would deactivate their access to our information as a company. But if we're sharing to Gmail and Yahoo, there's no accountability because this person could be long gone to another scenario or organization and still potentially have access to our content. And those are the scenarios that makes the hair on the back of, InfoSec or the security really stand up, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid with these ad domains. And we kind of build a process around who are we trusting this content with, and then monitoring it. Maybe there's a refresh or a recycle process to where you reevaluate this every 90 days, 6 months, 12 months, whatever's the right cadence for you, okay? So just be aware of that. And there's a ton of settings here. I love putting expiration dates on links, right? Again, it just forces the person who's sharing that out to where when it expires, so at least someone's complaining that said, hey, I no longer don't have access. It's just reestablish or reevaluate or revalidate that external share is still valid. And we're not just externally sharing and things are just lingering, right? I say this is a deep topic because when you get into security and compliance, there is sensitivity labels, there is site classifications, there are DLP policies that will really kind of help enforce this based on the type of information that you're sharing, that you have stored in your document library or in your site collection, right? So it's something, like one scenario you may have is highly confidential or highly classified or classified documents. That may be like, no, you just can't share this with anyone. This person needs to be a guest already established within the organization. And if they're not, we have our guest access or external access process to where there's a vetting process to ensure they get the right access to our organization. So restricting the external sharing policy is probably is definitely my top on my to-do list as a SharePoint admin. All right, so let's talk about linking off the sweep bar. Here you will notice that in my sweep bar, and that's what you call this bar right here. This is not a SharePoint bar, even though most of the time you see it in SharePoint. You can't style this based on the theme that you have in SharePoint. And that's what some of our business users want. They want full control. When you start talking intranet and designing the intranet, they want to have full control over this branding, and they want to control this right here. This sweep bar is part of the Office 365 tenant. You can style it. You can open it up to where users can personalize it, right? When I say personalize it, they can go into their Office profile or view account, one of these two, and they can set like a theme, or like in Outlook, they can set like a theme in this Office suite. But you can turn that off, right? Especially if you just want to say, no, I need everyone to see this, especially when you start dropping in the logo. This logo is the open door to the intranet. Again, you're dealing with 500,000, I don't know why that didn't link, but we're going to go ahead and link it up. Site collections. How do you establish the home for your intranet, right? And that logo just reinforces that and redrives that message. So how do you set that up? So in the SharePoint admin, actually, this is not going to be in the SharePoint admin center. This is going to be in the Microsoft 365, the general admin center here. So if you go into settings, org settings, organization profile, right where you set your release preference, there's an option for custom themes. Now, don't get it mixed up with the theming, because we're going to do that too. That's on my top 7. The themes that you have for your modern SharePoint sites. This is really just logos for the sweep bar, the color for the sweep bar, and things along this line. So here I want to say use a custom logo. I want to upload the image, and then I want to browse. And I got several here, and they're very restrictive. And this is tedious. Like I actually had to use Photoshop in order to narrow this in and get the right resolution and stuff like that. Because I think you're only dealing with a 200 by 30 dimension logo, which is going to force you to go rectangular. And here you can see with my Tesla logo, I'm more of a portrait mode. So now what I'm doing, I'm using like a transparent background in order to make that work. Now, once I bring in that logo, then you say you can make the logo clickable. And this is where I drop in the home page to my intranet. So here, if I go drop in, make it clickable, paste it in there, save that off. And if you just give this a few more minutes, then you will notice that users will be able to click on the logo to get to the intranet, right? And you know, so circling back on the new site creation, you notice that finally fell off. And that's the thing, like everything here is cached. When you're dealing with the cloud and you're dealing with multiple services or microservice type solution architecture, caching is everything. That's the only way you can make it performant. So with a lot of these changes, sometimes it takes time for that cache to either dissolve and then rebuild, rehydrate with the latest and greatest. So you always run into that. So if you make a change and if you don't see it right away, give it 20 minutes, give it an hour before you get concerned, especially if you double check and confirm that the setting's there. So now that I'm here, this is my logo. I click on it, I go to my home page. I love this because I can be in Word, right? So if I go into like Word Online, look like it's not here yet. But once this thing hydrates, the logo will be here. So I can navigate anywhere. I can be everywhere except for Teams, right? I can be in Outlook, and this logo should pop up, and it'll allow me to navigate there. Most importantly, though, from a user experience, it really, really helps out and shines when you're in SharePoint, because you may be in a scenario where you're looking at, now here's a site that's not part of my intranet hub. And this could potentially be its own hub, right? And understanding that the hub determines the look and feel of the site. So you may have multiple hubs because you may have a business unit that says, hey, we want to do something within our brand color scheme, but not like the intranet. Like we want to do something a little bit, off the cuff or off the beat. And I can be here, and then now they don't even have to link to the intranet. I just find my North Star, click on it, and I'm back on my intranet homepage. That whole transition between navigating between hubs and things like that within your tenant is going to get a lot better once we get the app bar, which is hopefully coming within the next few weeks. Okay, so let's talk about corporate branding. Here, you will notice I purposely have this gold, which is nowhere near the Tesla color. I can definitely come in here and do change to look. Again, this is the hub, so I have to be on the hub. And if I look at the theme, I can come in here and grab this out of the box red. And this out of the box red is going to get me close, but especially if you're dealing with marketing and whoever is in charge of your homepage, they want the company's red, right? Tesla, Coca-Cola, Chick-fil-A, all of them are red, but they have a different color, right? It's that hex color. So fine, no harm, no foul. Office 365 makes it very easy, and the modern SharePoint, Microsoft have made it very easy to customize a theme to match your brand with actually not a lot of tedious work. So what I'm going to do, let me look up our branding guidelines here for Tesla, and that's going to be, where's my, it should be a PDF here, this guy here. So this is going to be my branding guidelines. And if I scroll through this, and they talk about placement, they talk about color, they talk about how you can position the logo and all this other good stuff. But what I'm trying to do is get all the way down to the color palette. And that's where, there we go. So here in the corporate color palette, this is the red we want. And they have my red, my hex number for the web. So it's going to be that E3193. So I'm going to just keep that over here on the side. Let me open this up in Notepad, capture that hex number. And I didn't capture it. Let's see. Don't play with me. Don't play with me. Let's go. All right, so here's my hex number here. Put the hash in front of it. And now let's build a theme based off of this. And here's the magic. Like, you really only need the primary color, and it will build everything off of that because it has a really good algorithm to determine the different shades based off of that one color. and it would make sure that you get your white background and all this other good stuff. So here, and here's another thing with Office 365 that drives me nuts. If you're in this thing for 5 minutes, best believe you're going to have about 500 tabs open. I mean, it's like you have tabs after tab after tab. Okay, so here I'm doing a Google search on Fluent UI theme. Here's my theme designer. This is exactly what I want. And the way that this works is that when I first looked at this, because they redesigned it, like it used to be a little bit more admin friendly, right? More of a developer friendly. But now they kind of made it more user friendly. So what they're doing in this top section is that they're giving you a sample or some of the key components using the Fluent UI. These are Fluent UI controls, which are the same controls used in modern SharePoint. So they give you examples to where you can look. So when I first looked at this, I was clicking on all this stuff, expecting different behavior. And these are just samples, right? So you can just ignore it. They're just showing you like what this will look like once your color is applied. So here I just go and set in my primary color. And just like that, instantly without a refresh, it's showing me a lot of the different controls and how they're going to react to that color, right? And if I really want to go working with a designer and talk about, and this could be fast and quick, and this can be a painstaking process if your organization is built that way. If you put this in front of a UX person, they're going to go crazy and they're going to try to manipulate all of these colors and then make sure everything's in alignment, and it's just going to be a show, and you know what type of show that means, right? So normally what I would do, I say, hey, let's start here. Let me create you a sample site, and you get your little theme and you can go crazy. And when you want to deploy, unfortunately, they have to go through you to deploy it because it's a PowerShell script. Get it to where you want, give me several samples, and then I can create multiple themes. You go through it, play with the different scenarios on your test site, your dev site. And once you nail it, let me know, and then I'll go ahead and use that as the gold one, right? But here, I'm just dropping in the primary color, text color. I'm okay with the black, and I'm gonna go ahead and export this theme. We need it, in our intents and purposes, we need to export as PowerShell because we're gonna use PowerShell to deploy it. So here I just go copy, go down here to my my Tesla demo folder, go into a script. Again, this is where you have a game. That's another thing. If you're not familiar with PowerShell, you want to get familiar with PowerShell quick, because a lot of the things, especially as a SharePoint admin, you're going to need PowerShell to turn things on or off. A lot of the settings, most of the settings, depending on what it is that you need, may not be in the UI. And I've seen this thing progress, right? I've seen it start off where everything was PowerShell only. And then after a few iterations, Microsoft built something for that setting in the UI. But sometimes it's just too late and you need it now. So here in the custom theme, let's take a look at this PowerShell script. Very straightforward PowerShell script. Here I have residue of an old theme here. That the theme JSON object. No, this is not JSON. Not with the equals. But with this object notation, I'm gonna just save this off, right? With the curly brackets, the @ and the open curly bracket. That's that whole piece. And then I'm gonna store that into my local theme color variable. Let's walk through this. This is a variable. This is obviously, you know, it's a variable, but this is the URL to your SharePoint admin, right? And you notice that this is the admin with that notation there in the subdomain. This is the color that I'm, and I'll provide a link to it. If not, just pause the video and copy it so I can show. It's just a few lines of code. Don't copy this, right? You really just need this connect here. I do tend to gravitate towards the PnP commandlet in PowerShell module. I just think it's easier to use. They have a lot of shortcuts that can make, you know, some of your common tasks a lot easy. Here, I'm gonna name this theme to the Tesla Red. Connect to PowerShell. The URL is just going to be the admin URL to my tenant. And that's the thing. This is a tenant-wide scenario. You're not deploying these themes to one particular site collection. As of today, I don't know if that capability is there. I haven't looked at that in a while. I always deploy to, and I think you're forced to, tenant wide, and that's why you have this URL here. Once you put in that, set your local variable, I have both the remove, right? Because if you're testing and playing around with this, again, my scenario with the designer, I say, hey, have at it. Once you're done, come back and let me know. So now I'm removing all the ones that we don't need to keep, and I'm gonna just add the one that we need to keep. To remove it, all you do is just call this commandlet and provide the name, right? I'm doing everything in the variable, but you can obviously wrap this in quotes, the name of the theme in quotes, and then just run it, and then we'll execute. Once that's done, again, this supports MFA, right? And I'm really glossing through this because this is not my PowerShell training course. But if you do this flag here where it says use web login, this is meant to be a attended, not unattended, but an attended execution. And here you get the web URL, and this supports MFA as well, which is key, right? Because now we're going to that world where there's no more usernames and passwords being stored in code. MFA is used, or app ID and cert model authentication model is used. And again, those are things I probably should create a PowerShell video just to kind of walk through, soup to nuts. How do you set up your PowerShell environment? How do you get the key piece? How do you set up the TSL or TLS 1.2? I'm fuzzy on that because it's a one-time setup, but there are some proxy things that you need to do from the environment setup. I should do a PowerShell script on that. So here we go. O365.how, that's going to be my login for this guy. And then my password, let's go ahead and drop that in and then sign in. If I had MFA, I would get the prompt. I would have to do my authenticator and all that other stuff. So now I'm done. So I authenticate, this thing is running and it's done, right? No harm, no foul. And you can run that from your laptop. You don't have to be on the server or anything like that. That's the beauty with SharePoint Online. Most of the stuff that we need to do, we can do directly from our laptop or VM or whatever the case may be that we're using for our workstation. We don't have to be on the server with SharePoint bits installed. Okay, so now that we have that down, if I go to the SharePoint site, and trust me, I'm going to kill some of these tabs once we validate this. And now I can wait for my gear icon. I don't know why this gear icon takes forever. Like, this gear icon sometimes can take 30 seconds to load. All right, and here, and notice what they've done. Anything that you bring in that's custom, you're going to get this special category called company themes. And this is going to be available for all your site collections, not just your site collections for all your modern pages or your modern sites. Let me clarify that, because classic is still the old way of setting up the themes, the nasty way. So for the new way, any modern page or modern site, SharePoint site, you're going to have this available, regardless if it's communication, if it's modern teams, if it was provisioned with a Microsoft team, if it was provisioned with a Yammer community group, regardless of how the site collection was, the modern site collection was provisioned, this is going to be available. And that's a key to know, because anyone can use the brand, the company brand. So once I select that and save it, you will notice that this came in. This red seems hot to me, but I got it off the branding guideline, so it must be right. So to the naked eye, it looks weird. But just off that one color, that generator generates everything that you need. And for the most part, you're in the race. You're in the race. Now, if a UI UX person look at it, they may want to tweak it and do some other things. But for the most part, you're good. And if you have different color palettes, you can go off and build like, okay, here's the Tesla gray, right? Or here's the Tesla whatever. I mean, they have so many other colors. I probably don't want to build one for black unless you do like an inverted thing, which is pretty cool. But yeah, like the cool gray, you may want to do one for that, or maybe the lighter one. I don't know, right? So, but that's the thing. Oh, here's another thing to note. With the out-of-the-box themes, and I don't know if we're going to get this capability sooner than later, or even if they're going to provide this to us for our custom themes, but with our custom themes, we don't have the same capabilities that the out-of-the-box ones have. So if I click on this red, you notice I have that customized, and now I can go through these different slots. And maybe I just didn't generate the theme right. Maybe there is a way to do this. I have to take that offline and explore more. So maybe there is a way I can get more mileage out of my theme by providing variations of the main color. Because what would be nice is that I would have one theme, and then up here for the main color, I would have the black, I would have the red, I would have the different shades of gray. And then for the accent colors, I can work with the design team to figure out what are the right access colors based on our branding guidelines, right? But, we don't have that for the custom, or I didn't build it right? Maybe I just build the basic one, and, maybe if I dig a little bit deeper, I can provide one with the different slots. Okay, so that's it for branding. So that's which number was that? That is numbers 5. Number 6 would be to create a site request process. And we kind of talked about this, right? So if I go to my SharePoint portal, my create site option is not there. So how do I drive my users to create sites? It's the same scenario for Microsoft Teams. If you disable that site provisioning or Teams provisioning feature for your end users, which most organizations love to do, again, because of governance, you have to give them a way to request a site. And this could be through ServiceNow or through a help desk ticket or whatever the case may be. Or what I've done, and I really like this is where Power Apps and the Power Platform can really service our team as architects and admins and developers to really kind of help streamline some of these processes. So here under Tools and Resources, Common Requests, I have a link to a Power App. My users can go out here. This will just put it up. Again, what is the name of your site? So let's say Deshaun's Playground. Or Deshaun, no, let's do this. Let's do Model 2 Training. Because one of the things that, and again, I'm making this up, but say, for example, for every new model car Tesla have, they may have a whole training session or centered around that, and a resource portal for that new model. Like, what are the new features, what are the consoles, what are the color options, configuration options, yada, yada, yada. And then they just make that available to all their sales associates across the globe. So here, for training site type, I'm going to select training. This is high because I need this yesterday, right? And this is going to stick around, let's just say more than a year. New training portal and resource site for the Model 2, right? So we can have that. Now, notice one of the things here, and this is the recommendation I would highly recommend. When you do a site request, notice what I don't have in this list. I do not have, do you want a Yammer site? Do you want a SharePoint communication site? Do you want a modern SharePoint site? Or do you want a Microsoft team? I take the technology out of the conversation. Microsoft, and that's a recommendation because you never know where Microsoft is going to go. We're evergreen, right? New features, new portals, new capabilities are being applied to I was going to say forced on us, and that's a harsh word. It's not forced, but it's been applied to our tenant even while we're sleeping. Like, we just don't know. And it's a beautiful scenario to be in compared to where we were before. Because with on-prem, we had control. We want to upgrade, $1 million, consulting team, licensing, new servers, new OS, new, like it was a thing. Now we're evergreen. So you can be on SharePoint Online 2021, SharePoint Online 2025, and have the latest and greatest with a zero project, right? It's an airdrop, evergreen. It happens in the background. With that, Microsoft's going to have different portal types coming down the pipe. Take the technology out of it because the technology is confusing. The user doesn't know or maybe doesn't care the difference between a Yammer community, a SharePoint site, a Microsoft team. They're more concerned with what are my capabilities based on what I'm trying to do. And this is focused on what are you trying to do? Are you trying to manage a department? are you firing up a new store, again, which is a Tesla thing. They have these store sites to where everything about that store, inventory, shipment, incoming cars, whatever the case may be, that's where they go to see where things are for a client that ordered the car that's being dropped at their location, right? The same with the product. We have all these products. We have, prototypes. We have versions, we have refreshes, we have all these things centered around what is the one-stop shop, and there's a template to go about it. So here we have a training site. So again, take the technology out of it. That's that whole story is that. Really simple request form, submit it, done. Then I go to internally the site requests where all these requests get dropped, and then there it is. There's a SharePoint list. They have this request. Here's the Model 2. Recently submitted. Everything that you put in the form is there. And notice my form, right? And this is why, even as a SharePoint admin, you should know the Power Platform. You should know the capabilities of Power Apps and how to build them, the capabilities of Power Automate, how to build them, the out-of-the-box SharePoint form that ties to lists and libraries and stuff like that. You should know that. As an admin, you should know it anyway. Because you should be able to know it in order to support your users who are using it, right? So you should know it. But knowing this and spinning these up, and this shouldn't take forever. You should have this up and running in like 2 to 3 days. It's up and run like production. Here's the communication. Here's the request your site. 2 to 3 days, have this thing rocking and rolling. I have a different view because I'm using the out-of-the-box form for this. And here I can leave comments, right? You'll say, okay, working on it. And then I can add a comment to inform my team this is in progress. Maybe I have another column to assign it to me so people know who's working on it. And then I'll come in here, I'll change the status from submitted, which is the default, to in progress, and then ready to rock and roll. So all of my site requests are here. And I love this for several reasons. One, you're more control because now I can create the site. I can put the right prefix on the URL, . Two, I know who all my site owners are, even though I didn't ask for a site owner. Minimum, you want 2 site owners per site. What if someone is on extended leave? What if someone leaves the organization? You don't want that site to go orphan. You want to have a backup. So I can enforce that, right? This request process allowed me to get in front of that. Secondly, I know who all my site owners are. So if I need to do a communication centered around, oh, here's this new thing that'll help you out with managing your site, I know who to send that communication out to. I'm not guessing. I don't have to, just blindly fire it off to everyone in the organization. So there's a lot of goodness that come out of this, right? More than just adhering to governance and putting in best practices and things along those lines. It can be a communication. You can build a resource or center of excellence or a community of practice site just for all your site owners and all your content managers, for where they can go and share tips and tricks and how to do this, how to do that, different design tricks and all this other stuff. And you can build a whole community around this. Now, once I have this, I can go in and say, okay, so they requested a training site. Okay, fine. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clear these tabs out. So let me reset my tab. And I'm going to go into the SharePoint admin, actually have that bookmark. And I'm going to go and provision their site. So they want a training site and what they wanted to call it. So let's see. Let's put this request in. So they want to call this thing Model 2 training. So let me just copy this. And I know all the training sites are communication sites. And I'll put that Model 2 in there. I'll put my prefix in here. So this is going to be training. And then they'll just call it Model 2 or something like that. And the site owner is, let's just say Madison. I submitted this, but I'll assign this to Madison. And then click Finish. All right. So now this is going to provision, but let's look at this while that's running. If I pull up my master, let me pop this open. This is what the training sites look like. This is their base template. Now, of course, I can go in here and build this up, or I could be a nasty admin, and there's no nasty admins, and I know you won't do this. Send them the empty site, the generic site, and say, you build it up. And then, of course, it won't be consistent, and that's why we have templates in the first place. So now let me go to training. And let me show you really quick how you can leverage PowerShell and the PnP provisioning engine to mimic a site. And so here, let me open this up. Oh, I didn't get myself access. So here, let me add myself. Now notice this. Now this actually surprised me. I'm gonna come in as an admin. Madison came in as a primary admin, but understand these two roles are different than the owners. They're different than the owners. Site and the site collection admin holds true. Just understand they're different. And even though when you look at this site, let me hit save and let me show you a few things here. Because again, as a SharePoint admin, you should understand what's happening under the hood. So I'm gonna come in as a site collection admin, and I'm gonna be thrown into this owners group, right? Oh, actually, I'm in the owners group, but they don't see me because we know site collection admin do what site collection admins do. But if I add another user and give them full control and they're site owners, they're not necessarily site collection admins. And that's a distinction to make, because if subsites get created in this site collection, and I know we're moving away, but there are scenarios where you still need it, you can actually hide that subsite from the owner, but you can't hide it from the site collection admin. That's the distinction, right? So things like that just to be aware of, because you want these people to, and you want to delegate and give this and give them control over their site collection. And there may be a scenario where you're okay with giving them owner only and not site collection admin. But notice in that provisioning process, when it asks for the owner, I put Madison in there instead of my name. If I would have put my name in there and then came to the site and added Madison that way, she would have been the owner only and not a site collection admin. It's the order of operation, it's the order of how you do things that could end up with a different result. There's no secrets. If you click on this link and you look at permissioning, they're going to tell you who are the admins, and they're also going to tell you who are the owners, right? So just one of those things to be aware of, that depending on when you add the user and how you add the user, they can still appear in that owners group, but they may or may not be a site collection admin, which means that their capabilities are going to be limited to owners only and not site collection admin. Just wanted, that was something that I noticed, but I wanted to call that out. Okay, back to our story. Here we are, standard communication site. We need to get this thing to look like this, right? This is their template. Now, we can go through in there and massage it and get it to look like that. It's going to cost us some time, not a ton of time, but it's going to cost us some time. But there's definitely an easier way to do that. This is where, and I think this is my last option, not last option, sorry, this is my last point. Step number 7 is to make sure that you have a site provisioning process in place. And it's probably more of a replication than a provision, because this particular script do not create the site collection, but rather it copies on the master site, the source and target, what the source looks like, and replicate that down to the target. So here I have many different scripts already built up, and I have this one for training. Now understand that I have these scripts and I have this config file, and all of this plays into what I'm about to show you here as well, right? So here in this script, I have my target site. This is my new site that was created. So here, let me just copy. Oops. Just copy that empty shell that was the training model 2, the generic site, paste in that URL here. And then for my source, this is already primed for my master site collection. That's where I want it to look like. This is plumbing that's needed by the provisioning process. Notice the path is a file system path to this XML file. I'm actually creating this guy. So this is the path to say, create this file with this name and store it here. And then this config is going to say, and this one already exists. You're not creating this, so this one have to exist. This is where you're actually provisioning to do it. And the way that this works is that it's going to read all the configuration settings here based on what you tell it to do in this in line number 8. It's going to read this out, and it's going to know what to extract, and it's going to create an XML with all of the settings coming from the source. The next step, when I disconnect here, the next step, I reconnect, and now I'm looking at the target, and then I'm reconnecting to the target, and then I'm applying everything in this XML to that new site based on these configuration settings. Now, I don't know which step, like if this configuration setting is used for both the export and the import, or if it's only like export everything and be selective on the import. I don't know that, right? So I just haven't tested it, thoroughly to understand like the inner workings of it. It's supposed to be a black box anyway. But notice one thing to note: I do this extract and import every time I run it. That way I'm getting the latest and greatest. Because what's going to happen is that what can happen if they look at this template and someone comes along and say, oh, we need to change our template. Now everybody needs to have a document library or this list and stuff like that. The way that this script is built, it ensures that I'm getting the latest and greatest from the master, and I'm not getting a point in time copy by this XML. And that slows it down a little bit. Just probably by like 5 minutes. It's worth 5 minutes to make sure that you're getting the latest and greatest. Okay, enough of that. Let's run it. This is going to run. I'm going to go ahead and authenticate. I cache my credentials here. And then it's telling me that this XML file, again, I told you I'm rerunning this every time. So here's just a gut check and say, hey, this guy exists. This process, recreate this file. Yep, I'm good with that. And now this is going to go ahead and execute and do its thing. Now, when this is done, the expectation is that I have a new site that looks and feels like this, but it's going to come in with my name and all this other good stuff. So this is going to come in. And it actually does a really good job. It actually does a really good job. Now, you want to play with this config file, and it probably makes sense for me to show you, while that's running. Let's just put this progress so you can see that progress there. Let's open this config file. I'm going to just open this in Visual Studio Code just to kind of give you a sense of, and hopefully I don't lock it out, just to kind of give you a sense of what you have. You can go here to the schema, get the latest and greatest of what settings that you have, but this lets you know what information or assets you want to bring down. When it comes to pages, do you want to include the author or exclude the author, right? So if Madison is the builder of that template, maybe I don't want Madison's name to be on every new site as the created by or modified by user. Do I want to include pages? This is true because this is a beautiful scenario to where not only can you create these training sites, you can create these base pages or these template pages that they would have to go through and update based on their training. Again, enforcing consistency and ensuring that all these training sites have the same layout. And then here's some other things like, include like documents and events, which I think are default. If you have some other custom lists, you'll want to keep adding that to this array of objects. And then remove the existing nav. We know that when we provision the communication site, we have generic navigation, and maybe in the training site, it has the navigation already spelled out. So do you want to remove those placeholder nav items? Okay, I think we're done. And then as far as site security, do you want to include the groups? Now, here's another thing. If you create in a modern team, a modern team SharePoint site, those come with Office 365 groups. So from your master site, you don't want to bring down those Office 365 groups, right? Like you don't want that mix and match. You want the native groups that came with your site net new to be the primer for that security. You don't want to bring down anything additional. So it makes sense to go ahead and turn it off. Okay, so now it's all said and done. It says our site is done. Let's go ahead and hit refresh. And then hopefully if we got lucky with the lights, once this thing loads, it's a beautiful thing. And there you have it. And this came in with the green, and I actually did not pay attention to see if the original site theme was green. But now that we have our company theme set up, I can go to change the look, go to this theme, and then just save it there, right? So updating the theme, and there'll probably be some other small things that you might have to modify, but I mean, that beats going through and making sure that you get all this up. And not only did it just bring in the right structure in the web parts, it also brought in the content, which is beautiful, right? And now you can really get them off and running to the races with getting this up and running very, very quickly. And if needed to, and again, these are things that you probably want to add to your site requests, like should this be associated to a hub? But they're a site owner, so they have full control over that. Then, now that this is done, I probably want to send them an email. You'll let them know that it's done. In that email, I probably want to link off to our community site for SharePoint admins or SharePoint owners or content managers, and probably some best practices. Like I probably want to link to that document or PDF that's going to have all our best practices for managing sites and things along those lines. There's so much more to unpack here, but I think those are the core 7. And just reevaluate your current process now. Take a closer look at how you're supporting your users. What is the right governance? What is the right URL mix and things along those lines that we talked about? Maybe not all of this would apply. Maybe you only apply 1 or 2 of it. Maybe it's just a good video to watch and something that's back in your mind, you won't apply any of it. All of that's fair, but just understand that where the capabilities, and in my mind, where the top 7 that you should have in place as a SharePoint admin. Now, here's another thing. We can take this in many different directions because a part of this is also a life cycle. Another part of this is your SharePoint requests. Now that you're in front of it and all these site requests are coming through, like I say, 90% of these may be rubber stamps, right? It was like, okay, I'm gonna just do whatever you ask me to do. There's no vetting process. But I think one of the litmus tests could be is do a search and see if there's a site already out there that's like that. And then, trigger the question, pose the question of, is this the same as this existing site? And if not, how does it differ? And, whatever the scenario may be. But I think the life cycle, the policies and pieces to make sure that they provision this site, and now over time it becomes dormant. Not necessarily updates, but no one's accessing it. No one's even viewing it. And you have metrics and data to help you distinguish and highlight sites that went stale over time. And then start to build a decycle or archive or decommission process with these site collections, again, minimizing the digital junk. All right, that's it for this video. Any questions, comments, feedback, leave it in the comment section. I'll try to get to it as soon as I can. Thank you so much for hanging in there. Catch you in the next video. Take care.